I'm Marissa Langford. And when I opened the email that morning, I knew instantly it wasn't spam or a glitch. It was a wire confirmation 2300000 moved from our joint investment account into a Wyoming LLC I'd never heard of. I didn't click it right away. I just stared at the subject line. My pulse slow. Deliberate. Betrayal never comes with fireworks. It arrives with paperwork, I whispered to myself. So this is how you do it. R. The timestamp said 7:12 a.m. The transfer had cleared. I hadn't used that old email account in years. But I never delete the exits. Grayson always assumed my silence meant trust, not observation. I took screenshots. 3 of them. Then logged directly into the bank. It was there, clean. Polished. Real and authorized by him alone. He walked into the kitchen minutes later. Cufflinks in. Hair perfect. Smelling like the kind of man who had already won the morning. I didn't look up. I asked, "Did we move anything out of North Shore this week?" Like I was half bored. He hesitated. That barely visible pause between truth and performance. North Shore. No. Nothing big, he said, pouring his espresso with that false ease that comes from long practice. I turned the screen toward him. This looks big. His eyes flicked over the monitor once. Quick. Dismissive. That's part of a restructure, he said lightly. Tax positioning. Our accountant handled it. Then he smiled. And added, "You don't need to worry about it." I smiled back. Because the moment someone tells you not to worry, that's the moment you start building evidence. He left for work. Phone pressed to his ear. Voice sharp and composed. As soon as the door closed, I opened my laptop again, typing in the LLC name from the confirmation. The Wyoming registry came up clean, filed 3 months ago. No members listed. A commercial agent as the contact. No signature from me. No trace of my consent. A ghost structure built to disappear money under my name. I pulled up 6 months of statements and started marking transfers. Small amounts 17000, 24000, 19500, each just under the alert threshold. All of them moved toward the same destination. It wasn't clumsy theft. It was surgical. A long game. Hidden in decimals. That night, while he scrolled through news headlines on the couch, I kept my tone soft. "Did our accountant mention a trust in Wyoming?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Yeah," he said. Voice casual. "It's just back-end shielding. Standard stuff." I asked, "Does that include me?" And waited. He smirked. "Not directly. But it's all for us." I nodded, letting him think I'd swallowed it whole. After he fell asleep, I sat by the window with my laptop and created a new folder titled Q2 Audit. I saved every document, every transfer record, every LLC registration file. Then I wrote one line in my notes: Wyoming LLC, no spousal disclosure, trace pattern. The words looked small, but they felt like armor. Before sunrise, I sealed the folder and hid it in my home office drawer. In California, community property isn't a suggestion, it's the law. And Grayson had just crossed it with a paper trail too clean to be innocent. He thought he'd moved money. What he'd really moved was my attention. I called Bennett Hale because there are moments when you stop pretending you can handle it alone. He used to be my financial advisor before Grayson decided I needed someone more ambitious. I still had his number saved, buried under an old contact list labeled Archives. When he answered, his voice carried that same dry confidence I remembered. "Marissa Langford," he said. "You only call me when something's burning." "Ah." I kept my tone light. "It's not burning yet," I said. "But I smell smoke," he chuckled. then asked, "Your husband's work or yours?" I hesitated just long enough to make him curious. "Ours," I said. "And I need you to help me find out who's holding the lighter." He paused. "You're not recording this call, are you?" I smiled. "You think I'd tell you if I were?" I sent him the transfer details while we talked. He whistled softly as the file landed. 2.3 mil to a Wyoming LLC. That's not small potatoes. What are you looking for, confirmation or ammunition? I leaned back in my chair. The folder open in front of me. "Both," I said. "But I want it quietly." He hummed thoughtfully. "This is a single-member LLC with no active tax filings. Whoever set it up didn't want anyone tracing ownership through California records. Two brays." "That's what I thought," I said. "Can you find out who registered it?" He exhaled. "Not directly. Wyoming privacy laws are tight. But if the payments came from your joint account, that's marital property. You've got leverage." "Marissa. Legal leverage." I tapped my pen against the table. "I need proof before I bring it to my attorney. He's too good at rewriting stories." "Oh?" Bennett laughed quietly. "You married a storyteller, not an investor. The problem is you're finally reading the script." I smiled despite myself. "Then let's make sure I know the ending before he does." He asked for temporary access to the statements. I granted it. "Within minutes," he said. "He's been splitting funds across multiple feeder accounts, all under the same routing hub. It's coordinated." "Oh." My stomach tightened. "How long?" I asked. He typed something I couldn't see. 6 months at least. The earliest transaction is tied to a vendor shell in Santa Monica, a company called Pacific Core Holdings. The name hit me like static. "That's one of his conference sponsors," I said. "He's routing money through his own corporate events?" Bennett's voice dropped. "That's fraud if he's misrepresenting marital funds. But we'll need the LLC beneficiary name to prove it." "Okay. Can you get it?" I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. "Eventually," he said. "But not through public channels. You'll need a subpoena or someone inside his network." I laughed bitterly. "He's too careful for paper trails. And his assistant worships him." Bennett paused. "Then we build the trail ourselves. Start documenting every question you ask and every answer he gives." 19. I asked. "You mean set him up?" he replied. "I mean let him confirm his own lies." His tone softened. "You've always been sharper than him. Marissa, you just stopped using it." I swallowed. "Not anymore," he said. "Good. Then here's your first move. Ask him about the Santa Monica sponsor. If he denies knowing them, that's your crack. Don't." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long moment, the air heavy with realization. I hadn't just uncovered missing money. I had uncovered intent. Grayson didn't accidentally hide assets. He built a system to erase me on paper before he erased me in life. And now, I had the first thread to pull. Bennett called 2 days later and said, "You ready to play offense?" I was sitting in my office, the blinds half closed, the same folder spread open on my desk. I asked, "You have something?" he replied. More like a way to make him talk without realizing it. I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other. "You mean a trap?" I said. "No," he said smoothly. "I mean a structured conversation. Entirely legal." And no. He explained the plan while I took notes on a yellow pad. "Ask him to review the North Shore balance sheet with you," he said. "Pretend you're working on a refinancing proposal. Then casually reference Pacific Core Holdings. If he confirms involvement, record the date and his response. You're not wiretapping, you're documenting a financial discussion between spouses. That's legal in California." I smiled. So I let him build the rope himself. Bennett chuckled. You just hand him one end. Doggoed. That night, I waited until Grayson finished his call. He looked pleased. The kind of pleased that comes from hearing your own voice echoed by people who owe you money. I set down 2 glasses of wine and said, "We should go over the portfolio. I might need to liquidate some shares for a project." He raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you handle liquidity?" I smiled. "Since I started paying attention." We sat across from each other, my laptop between us. He looked at the spreadsheets like a man studying a map of his own territory. I pointed to the line item. "This vendor, Pacific Core Holdings, why does it appear under discretionary expenses?" He didn't blink. "They're a consulting intermediary," he said. "Part of a sponsor network." "Why?" I shrugged lightly. "Just making sure we're compliant." He gave a quiet laugh. "Don't worry. It's all above board." 2. I nodded, letting my eyes stay soft. "Good. Because our accountant might need full documentation for the refinance. They'll ask for vendor contracts." His jaw shifted. Subtle but sharp. "That's unnecessary," he said quickly. "They only need the summaries." I tilted my head. "So you'd rather not include the full files?" He smiled thinly. "Marissa, this isn't your lane. I've been doing this for years." I met his gaze. "And yet, things keep moving without my signature." "Oh how?" He laughed again. But the sound was brittle. "You're overanalyzing. Everything I do benefits both of us." I leaned back. "I'm sure it does. I just don't remember authorizing our retirement funds to underwrite consulting firms." His hand froze over the mousepad for a second too long. "You're misreading the reports," he said. Tone lower now. I smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind walking me through them." We spent another hour in that silent tug-of-war disguised as cooperation. He spoke in jargon. I asked questions that sounded naive but cut too close to the truth. Every answer was logged. Every evasion marked. When he finally stood up and said, "You're wasting your time," I said softly, "No. I'm building context." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't have to. The next morning, I sent Bennett a summary of everything: dates, statements. His exact words. Bennett replied, "Perfect. We'll cross-reference that with the transfer timestamps." He just confirmed knowledge of the entity. I stared at the email. The words crisp and final. Grayson thought he'd hidden everything under legal shade. What he didn't realize was that I'd just documented sunlight. By noon, I'd already scheduled a discreet meeting with a divorce attorney Bennett recommended. "You're moving fast," Bennett said when I told him. "No," I answered, slipping the folder into my bag. "I'm moving on time. Because when someone builds a system to erase you, the only real revenge is proving you understood the architecture better than they did." Bennett asked, "How far are you willing to go?" And I said, "Far enough to make him regret ever thinking I wouldn't." He paused for a beat before answering. "Then it's time you take control of the narrative." I knew what that meant before he explained it. Grayson's empire wasn't built on ethics or innovation, it was built on reputation. And nothing collapses faster than a public image carefully curated over cocktails and corporate panels. He introduced me to a contact named Elise, a journalist who specialized in investigative features on corporate ethics. "You don't need to leak everything," Bennett said. "Just enough for her to start asking the right questions." I met Elise at a coffee shop in Century City. Quiet but strategic. The kind of place where conversations disappear under the sound of milk steamers. She leaned in and asked, "Why me?" I smiled. "Because you write stories that sound like warnings." "Done as it." I slid a flash drive across the table. "What's on it?" she asked. "Internal ledgers. Vendor contracts. proof of undisclosed transfers to shell companies linked to Pacific Core Holdings. She hesitated. You know, publishing this could trigger a legal storm. I sipped my coffee. That's the idea. Elise tilted her head, assessing me. Are you doing this for justice or revenge? I smiled faintly. What's the difference when the evidence is clean? After our meeting, Bennett called. You just gave her a loaded gun, he said. I replied. No. I gave her a spotlight. He's the one standing in the dark. That evening, I returned home to find Grayson pacing the living room. His phone pressed to his ear. He turned when he saw me. Did you authorize a document request from our bank? I blinked slowly. Should I have? His eyes narrowed. The firm called me. They said someone flagged our accounts. I shrugged. Maybe someone noticed the missing millions. He walked closer. His tone cold. You think you're clever. But you're not playing at my level. I met his gaze and said quietly. Then why are you sweating? He exhaled through his nose, forcing a laugh. You've been talking to someone. Who? I tilted my head. Wouldn't you like to know which of your partners has a conscience? His jaw tightened. You don't want to make this public. Marissa. I smiled. Small and dangerous. You made it public the day you forged my signature. Eh? He froze for a split second before covering it with arrogance. You can't prove anything, I said. That's the beautiful thing about proof, it doesn't need me to believe in it. He threw his hands up and muttered. God. You're dramatic. I leaned in. Voice low. No. I'm thorough. The conversation ended there. But the air in the room changed. He didn't realize yet that the game had already shifted from control to containment. The next morning, Elise texted one line, "We're running it." The article went live within hours, headlined, "Whistleblower alleges hidden transfers in tech partnership network." It never named him directly, but anyone who mattered knew exactly where to look. Calls started flooding his phone. Investors asked questions. His PR director canceled meetings. He walked through the house like a man standing in wet cement, each step heavier than the last. By nightfall, his temper cracked. You think you can ruin me with a headline? He shouted. I looked at him over the rim of my glass. No, I said, calm and sharp. I'm just giving people something to Google. The silence that followed was the sound of a man realizing his power was now evidence. His empire, a liability. I turned away before he could speak again. Because for the first time, I didn't need to win the argument. I already owned the story. I didn't plan to go live. It wasn't part of the original outline. But the moment demanded something public. When you're married to a man who built his image in front of cameras, justice has to wear the same stage lights. Grayson was scheduled for a virtual panel that evening, a charity roundtable with donors, investors, and media partners. He was streaming from his home office, confident, polished, and absolutely oblivious that the backdrop behind him was about to turn into evidence. I stood just outside the frame, my phone in hand, streaming to a private link. Marissa, what are you doing? He whispered when he noticed the faint glow of my screen. I smiled. Just documenting transparency. Isn't that what your firm promotes? His face tightened. Turn that off, he hissed. I stepped into view and said clearly, actually, you might want to keep it running. Your viewers are going to love this part, too. He froze. What part? I tilted my head. The part where I show everyone where their donations went. His co-panelists looked confused on the monitor. Marissa, he said through clenched teeth. You're embarrassing yourself. I smiled sweetly. You mean exposing you? Then, facing the camera, I said, for anyone wondering, those charitable partnerships you're hearing about tonight, The funds were routed through Pacific Core Holdings, a shell company owned by my husband. Saturn. He stood up so fast his chair slammed into the bookshelf. End the stream. He barked at his assistant. I kept my tone calm. You can't. It's mirrored. The feed's public now. His face drained of color. You're lying. I turned the laptop toward the camera. Pulling up the financial dashboard. Would you like me to show them the transaction IDs? The chat box on the screen exploded as his colleagues tried to intervene. He lunged toward me, whispering, "Stop this. You'll destroy everything." I looked him dead in the eye. No. Grayson. You already did. He tried to smile for the camera. Desperate to salvage composure. My wife is clearly misinformed. She's been manipulated by people with an agenda. I interrupted. Then, explain why your signature is on the transfer documents. He froze again. Eyes flicking between the screen and the papers I held up. Forgery, he said quickly. That's your defense? I asked. Raising an eyebrow. You forged my consent. And now you're pretending it works both ways? The comments flooded faster reporters. Analysts. Even donors watching in real time. Someone typed. Audit the foundation. Another wrote. This is embezzlement. I turned to the camera. My voice steady. For months. I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out, I was just living with a man who thought no one would check the math. He tried to reach for the laptop. But I stepped back. You wanted control. Grayson, I said. So here's your audience. I can't it. His PR director's name flashed on his phone. He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, Do you realize what you've done? I smiled faintly. Yes. I've made sure no one forgets what you did. He laughed once. Low and bitter. You think this will ruin me? I'll rebuild. I met his gaze. Not if the foundation board freezes your accounts first. In 22. That was the moment his expression cracked the quiet. Dawning realization that this wasn't an argument he could out-talk. The live feed kept rolling as he tried to gather his notes. Mumbling excuses that sounded like static. I ended the stream with one final line. My voice calm and deliberate. You don't get to rewrite this story anymore. I already published the truth. And just like that, the perfect public man vanished in real time. Undone by his own performance. By morning, the news cycle had eaten him alive. Every outlet from Los Angeles to San Francisco had replayed the live stream, dissecting his words frame by frame. I sat in my attorney's office, the sunlight spilling across polished oak, while he flipped through a stack of documents thicker than a confession. You've got him cornered, he said without looking up. I replied, I didn't corner him. He built the cage himself. To my attorney. David Reed tapped his pen on the contract. The joint assets are traceable. Everything he diverted falls under community property. That includes the LLCs, the shell accounts, and any liquidated shares tied to Pacific Core Holdings. I nodded. So I can recover everything? He smirked slightly. You can recover more than everything. You can expose the accomplices who helped him hide it. I leaned back. Let's make sure they regret their signatures too. Trey. When Grayson finally called, his voice was brittle under a practiced calm. You didn't have to drag this into court, he said. I answered. You dragged it into the bank first. He sighed. You're not going to win this way. I laughed softly. I already did. The state of California just subpoenaed your offshore files. There was silence on the other end before he muttered. You think you're smarter than everyone, I said. No. I just read the fine print you wrote for yourself. Ado. A week later. He walked into mediation looking like a man who hadn't slept. He whispered. We can settle quietly. I folded my arms. Quietly? After you turned our marriage into a corporate fraud case? He clenched his jaw. I'll give you half. I leaned forward. It's not half if you stole it first. His attorney tried to intervene, but David cut him off. Your client's transfers breached fiduciary duty within marriage. California Family Code 1100C. She's entitled to restitution and punitive damages. Grayson's face blanched. Punitive? I smiled faintly. You'll remember that word longer than my name. It's Amstock. We spent hours negotiating, but the leverage had already shifted. Every time he tried to posture, I reminded him of the bank statements signed under his credentials. Every time he tried to plead, I reminded him of the donors he misled. Finally, he slammed his pen down. Fine. Take it. Take all of it. I leaned in. No. I'll take what's mine. The rest will go to the foundation you laundered through. His attorney stared at me. You're donating the recovered funds? I nodded. Publicly. The world deserves to see integrity in the same headlines that saw deceit. Out. When we walked out, David said, That was brutal. I smiled faintly. He built his empire on manipulation. I just taught him the market correction. Later that afternoon, Bennett called. The settlement's making waves, he said. He'll lose his board seat by Friday. I replied. Good. I don't need him unemployed, just irrelevant. Bennett laughed. You really are something. Marissa, I answered. No. I'm just what happens when the system forgets who it tried to erase. That evening, as I signed the final legal papers, I looked at the last clause, the restitution line that would transfer everything back to me. Grayson's name was printed neatly beneath mine, his signature trembling against the ink. I placed my pen down and said quietly to David, You know what's satisfying? Watching a man realize justice isn't loud, it's documented. He smiled. And enforceable. I nodded. Especially in California. Outside, the cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But I didn't stop. Because the only story that mattered now was the one written in court records, mine. The headlines shifted before the ink on the settlement even dried. Langford Holdings faces audit after spousal disclosure. Ex-wife turns corporate scandal into transparency campaign. I didn't need a publicist. Grayson's downfall had done all the marketing for me. When Bennett called, his tone carried that amused pride only old allies can afford. So, what now? Fade quietly into victory? I smiled. Looking out over the Los Angeles skyline. No, I said. I think I'll host a seminar on ethical finance. It feels poetic. It's not dough. The idea spread faster than I expected. Universities reached out. Journalists requested interviews. And a nonprofit asked if I'd join their board. During one interview, the host said, You've become the symbol of accountability. Did you plan this? I laughed softly. No one plans betrayal. But once it happens, you decide whether it buries you or brands you. He smiled. And you chose branding, I replied. I chose control. Ever. When the day of the conference came, I stood backstage watching the audience fill the hall. I hadn't spoken publicly in years, but this time, I wasn't someone's wife standing in her husband's shadow, I was the story itself. Bennett approached, handing me a mic. You sure you want to do this live? He asked. I nodded. After what I survived. The camera doesn't scare me anymore. He smirked. Just don't name him directly. Let people connect the dots. I grinned. I learned that from you. Walking onto that stage felt like reclaiming oxygen. The applause was polite at first, then steady. I began simply. When you marry power, You learn one thing fast: it doesn't protect you, it tests you. The audience leaned forward. I once believed silence was grace. I continued. Until I realized silence only feeds corruption. Someone from the front row asked. So what broke the silence? I smiled. Math. Numbers don't lie. Even when men do. Accusing. After the talk, reporters swarmed with microphones. Do you think Grayson will ever recover? One asked. I paused long enough for the cameras to catch it. Recovery requires integrity, I said. And that's not something you rebuild, it's something you either have or you fake until you're caught. Another journalist asked, do you forgive him? I tilted my head slightly. Forgiveness isn't a gift, I said. It's a boundary. And I've learned to build those very well. Later that evening, as I stepped outside the venue, Grayson was there, waiting by the curb, looking smaller than I remembered. You turned me into a villain, he said. I looked him straight in the eye. You wrote the script. He swallowed. You could have destroyed me completely. I smiled faintly. I didn't need to. You do it every time you try to explain yourself. He looked away. Voice low. You'll never know what it's like to fall this far. I replied quietly. No, Grayson. You'll never know what it's like to climb back up. I was watched. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through the articles. My name was attached to panels, think pieces, and op-eds about ethical transparency. I wasn't the woman betrayed anymore. I was the woman who weaponized truth. I looked out at the city lights and whispered, You took everything to erase me. I took it back to make you unforgettable. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was reclamation. And for the first time, that felt even better. I moved out of the house 2 weeks after the conference. The furniture stayed. The art stayed. Even the scent of him lingered faintly in the hall. But none of it belonged to me anymore. Ownership isn't about possession, it's about peace. My new apartment overlooked the ocean. Smaller but infinitely freer. Sunlight spilling across white walls like a promise. The first night there, I slept without locking the door. Not because I trusted the world again, but because I trusted myself. Bennett called that weekend. You sound lighter, he said. I laughed softly. That's what happens when you stop dragging ghosts through the present. He asked if I wanted to take on a consulting role for his firm's ethics division. I hesitated. You sure that's not a pity hire? He chuckled. Please. No one intimidates auditors better than you. I smiled. I'll think about it. What I didn't say was that I'd already built a new company small, deliberate, specializing in financial integrity, consulting for women rebuilding after divorce. One afternoon, my attorney David dropped off the final clearance documents. You're officially done, he said. I looked at the envelope. Its weight surprisingly light. It doesn't feel like revenge anymore, I admitted. He smiled. That's how you know it worked. I poured 2 cups of coffee and asked, Do you ever get tired of watching people fight over money? He leaned back. No. But I never get tired of watching someone win without losing themselves. I nodded. That's the real currency. And Saz. A month later, a journalist reached out asking for a follow-up interview. The public wants to know what's next for you, she said. I laughed. That's the beauty of starting over. No one gets to predict the next chapter. She pressed. Would you ever speak to him again? I paused. Then said, Closure doesn't always require a conversation. Sometimes it's just deciding the story ends when you say it does. That evening, as I walked along the beach, I saw a couple arguing by the shoreline, his gestures sharp, hers quiet but firm. I watched her walk away first, her pace steady, her shoulders straight. For a second, I saw myself months ago, trapped between apology and rage, I whispered. Keep walking. And for the first time, it didn't hurt to remember. Healing doesn't announce itself. It just replaces noise with stillness. Bennett met me for dinner a few nights later. You really did it, he said, raising his glass. You turned collapse into strategy. I smiled. No. I just learned that power doesn't vanish, it transfers. He laughed. So, what's your next move? I looked out at the skyline. Lights glittering like unfinished stories. To teach women how to hold their silence like a weapon. I said. Until it's time to speak and everything changes. Iswansik. When I got home, I opened my notebook, the same one that once held passwords, transactions, and evidence. Now it held ideas for workshops, mentorship programs, and one final note scribbled at the top of a blank page: control is not revenge. It's clarity. I closed it and whispered, that's enough. The sound of the ocean drifted through the window, steady and sure. And for the first time, my life wasn't about reclaiming what was lost, it was about choosing what stayed. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And if you carry a story of your own, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. Always.